A lot of us are in work groups and friend groups and on Facebook and with family members who think very differently from the way that we do. And we have a lot of energy for talking to them until they see how right we are. And so I wanted to talk today about having dialogue with people who think very differently from yourself. Now, this might be equally useful for conservatives who have crazy liberals in their family, or for liberals who have crazy conservatives in their family, and Thanksgiving is coming. So this is a roadmap for all of us about how to change the mind of somebody who disagrees with us. Let's look at science for a minute. Science, when studying people who have conservative politics and people who have liberal politics, they are finding out that the brains of conservatives and liberals are wired somewhat differently. This might be from birth, or it might be something that's learned. The brain is very plastic, and they're finding out that it's more plastic than we thought. But when people are shown pictures which are pleasant, neutral, scary, or disgusting, they respond differently with different autonomic nervous system responses and different eye movements. And what they found was that conservatives react more strongly to the photographs that are scary or disgusting than liberals do. So about half of their respondents, half of their subjects in the survey react pretty strongly, and half of them don't react as strongly. And the autonomic nervous system responses don't always correlate with what the subjects say, how the subjects say they're responding. So they might go, that's not too bad, but according to their body, they reacted pretty strongly. What is up with that? So what they think is, and this is a study from the University of Nebraska, a guy named John Hibbing, University of Nebraska. He came up with the conclusion that people with conservative political views tend, not always, but tend to react more strongly to fearful or negative stimuli. And what he calls this is being threat-oriented. So they're very watchful for threats and react strongly to threats. And so he theorizes the conservative focus in politics on a strong military, on well-controlled immigration, on tough law enforcement, and on making sure that guns are widely available, that kind of goes with a threat-oriented mindset. And he surmises that this threat orientation was very helpful in an evolutionary sense for the survival of the human race. In fact, starting in 2003 with a guy named John Jost at NYU, these studies have been coming fast and furious because everybody's curious about why is our country so polarized? Why can we not speak to each other civilly very much? This could be one of the reasons. And the Yost study says that conservatives show psychologically a greater preference for certainty and less of a preference for ambiguity, whereas liberals don't really prefer certainty and are very comfortable with ambiguity. And that liberals are more new experience-oriented rather than threat-oriented, which also evolutionarily would help the human race move forward. So you have these two groups of people that nature creates, apparently, one with their foot on the gas and one with their foot on the brake, and that is how nature prefers it, so that we balance one another out. Our culture and our world needs the threat-oriented people who are ready to keep everybody safe, and the new experience-oriented people who think about safety less. And the correlations between a person's responses to these photographs and between a person's political views are so strong that the researchers find that they have been able to predict someone's politics without words being spoken at all, just by watching their eye movements when they see these photographs. Ain't that something? So, I do know how to speak English properly. Graduated from Duke, it's all right. Just every now and then I will lapse into vernacular. In fact, when Jost came up with his findings in 2003, it sounded, this threat orientation and need for certainty sounded so unflattering to some politicians that his funding was looked into. But so many of his peers scientifically were coming up with the same things, and so many people finally realized, well, hey, it's not bad to be threat-oriented, and it's not bad to be new experience-oriented. Nobody's crazy. We need both, so that the funding was left alone. Conservatives also tend, according to the studies, to be happier and more stable in their lives. Liberals are a little more neurotic. I'm going to look into their funding. But being sure of what's true, and being sure and comfortable with what's familiar, and being well protected against strange ideas, apparently can keep you a little more stable. And also, what they found is that conservatives can be somewhat more comfortable with the idea of inequalities, that this is just the way it is. Some people are not going to have as much as other people. That's just the way of it. I got a birthday card from a conservative member of my family, which I thought was hysterical, and it was a plate with the remains of crumbs on it. And it said, I got you a birthday cake, but I gave it away in pieces to people who were not fortunate enough to have a birthday today. I was like, well, that's how they see it. My eye movements were calm. Another thing that's different is the moral code and framework within which you see the world and make your decisions about the world. The people who study, I just came across this research this week, and it's very scholarly and dense, and I could understand all 163 pages of this study if I had time to read it, but the sermon had to be delivered now. So I read fast. But what I gathered is that there are 5 different moral codes that they have named. One is the harm and care code. Is this harming anybody? We're going to how do we care for people? And one is the fairness code. Then there is also the respect for authority code, the purity and sanctity of ideas code, and the in-group and loyalty code. So is this loyal? Are these ideas pure and sanctified? does this idea have respect for the way things are and respect for authority? Is this fair, or does this cause harm, or does it care for people? And what they found is that liberals mostly make their decisions based on the harm and care and the fairness and inequality code. We're looking for, is this fair? Is this just? Does this do harm, or does this care for people? Whereas conservatives use all 5 codes fairly equally. Thought that was interesting too. So, how do you change somebody? We all know it's possible because people do change. For this part of the sermon, I read an article by FBI hostage negotiators. How do you talk to somebody who's actually crazy, out of control, and has hostages? So none of us is talking to somebody that badly off, usually. Unless alcohol is involved at Thanksgiving. And there is what they call ladder to behavioral change. And our problem is that most of us, conservatives and liberals alike, jump all the steps and we start on the 4th rung of the ladder. Let me tell you what the first rung is. If you want to have dialogue with somebody who's very different from you, the very first stage, the one that takes the longest, the one that demands the most front-end investment, is active listening. Active listening. How's that different from just listening? Active listening means that you give signals that you're listening. You go, I see. You ask open-ended questions. Tell me more. How did you come to this position? What do you like about that guy? Why is this important to you? Help me understand. And the way you ask those questions is because you really want to understand. You're not just looking down the list and go, help me understand. And by the way, what's wrong with you is never a good question. So, you make encouraging sounds, you ask open-ended questions. Another way of active listening is by naming the emotion that you hear. So when somebody, and this works in couples, families by the way too, when somebody is very upset, or when somebody is laying out their beliefs, you just, as far as it can sound natural and not weird to you, repeat the last few words they said. They have therapist computer programs that'll do this. While you're typing to them, they just repeat your last 3 words and you kind of feel understood. So if somebody says, I just don't think background checks are good for guns. I think that it will make a list and they'll come get our guns. And you say, they'll come get your guns. And then they go, yeah, and furthermore, or you could say, tell me more. And this takes a long time. You also name the emotion that you hear. Did I tell you that part? You just say, that sounds upsetting. You sound angry. That sounds fearful. And then they can either say, yeah, or no, I'm not fearful. I'm mad. You go, thank you, okay. So after the active listening comes a point where you number 2 step, you have empathy. This is really hard. Because if someone disagrees with you a lot, it's very hard to have empathy with where they're coming from. You can't fake empathy. You have to really have it. That means you have to understand where they're coming from. You can't say, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. They can feel whether you really understand where they're coming from or not. Right? Can't you feel it when you're talking to somebody? Have you ever had that experience where somebody understands where you're coming from? Yeah, thank you for nodding at me. So empathy is the next step after active listening, and it's very hard because in order to be empathetic with somebody whose views are so different, you have to actually get in touch with those elements in yourself that would lead you to feel that way. You have to become, if you're a liberal, you have to become in touch with the threat-oriented part of you that you don't like to look at. Or if you're a conservative talking to a liberal, you have to become in touch with that part of yourself that's hungry for new experiences, that's not scared of anything strange, that in fact seeks it out, that in fact thinks maybe we shouldn't have any borders at all. What's the point of borders anyway? So if we get in touch with those little slivers of ourselves that we don't normally listen to, perhaps we can find some empathy. After empathy comes rapport. Rapport is when you understand them and they understand you, and you both can feel the understanding between you. That's rapport. And at that point, you can go on to the next step, which is influence. That's the one we usually try to start with. I'm going to try to influence you. See, already there were so many things before influence. Thanksgiving dinner's over. And by the time you have enough understanding of where the other person's coming from, and you have enough rapport with them, by that time, you're almost as open to being influenced by them as they are to be influenced by you. Maybe your mind will change. Did you ever think of that? And after influence, yeah, I see you shaking your head. And after the influence portion comes the behavioral change portion, if you're going to get there at all. Some people say that you can more easily influence somebody during the influence phase if you appeal not to your moral code, but to theirs. You say, what is important to you in this situation? What feels moral to you? Okay, then I would like to ask you to consider that this political position is not consonant with what is in your moral code. Would Jesus talk about anchor babies? I don't know. Doubt it. I doubt it because I'm a liberal. I don't know. I didn't know Jesus. I wasn't there. Nobody here was there, by the way. Also, being quiet can be a great tool when you're having dialogue. Sometimes just hearing yourself, if anybody's gone to therapy or had a discussion with somebody who's trying to help them understand themselves, you understand that just hearing yourself say something out into the air sometimes changes the way that you think about it or feel about it. And so I remember having dialogue with some Moonies. We were on a trip together, and I was sitting on the bus for 4 hours with this guy who was a Moonie, and we were talking about his beliefs and what Mr. Moon did. And I never called him Reverend Moon because he doesn't have a seminary degree. He's an electrical engineer. So I feel somewhat strongly. I said, so how does Mr. Moon, what does he do before he marries y'all? How does he pick? And he was telling, what he did, because he used to have these mass weddings. I know some of y'all are too young to remember, but he would have these mass weddings where he'd marry thousands of people, 2 by 2, to each other. And he was saying, and he takes away your sins before he marries you. I said, he takes away your sins? Technique. Takes away your sins? He went, yeah. I said, how does he do that? Well, he dabs some wine on your photograph. I just let it hang there in the air. And then I said in the most emotionally neutral tone I could, he takes away your sins by dabbing wine on your photograph. He said, now that I say it out loud, it sounds really stupid. And I've had that experience about my belief systems too before. When I say that out loud, it sounds really stupid. think we've all been there. Hope so, anyway. It makes you a better person. So, another element in all of this is that we have the conservatives and the liberals now, since the 80s, have different facts. There used to be this thing called the fairness doctrine. Some of y'all remember it, where newspapers had to have the pro point of view and the con point of view. They had to find both. The radio stations, the TV stations had to have both points of view on. That was the law, Federal Communications Commission law. But during the Reagan administration, lots of things got deregulated. That was one of the things that got deregulated. There was no more fairness doctrine. And so the next year, Rush Limbaugh's show came on the air, and we began to have conservative radio and liberal radio, conservative TV, liberal TV, and eventually conservative facts and liberal facts, red facts and blue facts. And so when you come to have a dialogue with somebody, you're dealing with totally different facts, or facts, because making up things is not a property of one group or the other. In fact, the first time facts were made up that I learned about in school as a media major was that during the debate with Nixon, JFK won the debate because not only did he have good makeup on and he didn't look like a ghost, number two, he had statistics at his fingertips. He was just naming statistic after statistic, and later on admitted that he had made them up, every one. And so now we have, we're trying to have dialogue. This is why we're so polarized. We're trying to have dialogue with people who have had completely different news stories emphasized to them, with completely different theories editorial behind them and completely different points of view, and never the twain shall meet unless you're just a political junkie who's also retired and you can hear both sides. Then you're not really able to follow all of the various points of view, and you don't even hear everything. So all of this is to say, I don't want to ask you to give up the fun Facebook charts and jokes and the memes and things. I'm not asking the conservatives to give up those, and I'm not asking the liberals to give up those, except just please check and see that they're actually true. And because it makes you feel good and energized and happy, and in a little bit of a nasty way, but not too nasty, just to shoot those things out into the air by email or by Facebook. But I am asking you to let go of the idea that this will finally convince them. Look at this. This will finally do it. It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. What's going to do it? Listening, if anything. And if these are people you love, you listen with love. And you say, I am just going to listen to you instead of trying to correct your facts or make you see things my way. I'm going to let go of that and just listen to you because I love you. And that means that you are never going to understand how right I am. And one day I will not care. One day I will not care.